Hello everybody, Bruce McGonigal here. Happy Friday, everybody. Today my topic's going to be about how Canada has become a fascist nation by stealth, and to prove this, we are going to look back through time at what happened in Nazi Germany before it became Nazi Germany, and then as it became a fascist country. In the First World War, German propaganda, like in any other war, was that Germany could not be defeated, and that the German people were proud, strong, smart, and capable, and impossible to defeat. Hitler bought into that mindset completely. So in 1918, when the war ended and Germany lost, Hitler became extremely bitter towards the German people themselves and towards their democratic process. Hitler believed that the politicians and many people inside Germany were weak and unworthy of the vision and dream of a German superpower national state that could be like the UK and basically a huge colonial power around the world. He basically believed that Germany would become the UK and take over the top spot in the world. Okay? So by 1930, Hitler was not that popular. He was popular enough, though, that his political party came in second in an election with approximately just over 18% of the vote. So not even 1 in 5 Germans in an election where they got well over 80% voter turnout chose the Nazi Party. They did not. The number one party that did not get a majority government was the Social Democrats Party, and the number 3 party was Communist Party. So all the 3 parties did not get along together at all, and it was almost impossible to pass any legislation. Well, after World War I, they had Article 48 that was put in place that would allow the government to be able to override the legislative majority that would be needed for most things if they could use emergency decrees. And that's exactly what started happening. In fact, with the Great Depression sliding in, the Article 48 was used 107 times to be able to pass legislation and to be able to enact other kinds of measures for society that had not gotten majority consensus by the German legislature. So despite what people think, it wasn't Hitler himself who was the first to start destroying freedom for the people of Germany. It was the party before him that he was actually in opposition to. So by 1933, the deadlock had been so bad in the legislature that they felt they needed a change, and Hitler, the number 2 party leader, was given the chancellorship. Hitler reached out to the conservatives, which was a smaller party, to work with them to get things passed in the legislature and to try and get more political authority for his agenda. But he realized he wanted an election, and hopefully with that election would seize a lot more power now that he is seen as the state figurehead, as the chancellor. This was his goal. 6 days before that election, the German parliament building, the legislature, was attacked, firebombed, and caught on fire. Hitler seized on this to go after his political opponents. He didn't go after the Social Democrats, who were the biggest winning party in the last election. He decided to go after the number 3 party, which was the Communists. He directly blamed them and said that the Communists were trying to seize control of Germany through violence, through chaos, through social disorder, and because of that, he himself would use Article 48 to enact a measure to go after the people that he believed were causing the problems, the communists. So he directly was pointing fingers at them. Okay, it was called the Reichstag Fire Decree. So this was really important because this decree eliminated most of people's civil liberties inside Germany and gave Hitler and the Nazi Party the ability to go after their political opponents at will and lock them up, steal their property basically, legally, and completely shift the German society, without anybody really knowing it was happening at the start, to a totalitarian system where he ruled by edicts. Okay? I mean, it's really quite amazing that that happened. So when you have that kind of authority, like the old saying goes, absolute power corrupts absolutely, the German Nazi Party was able to take their children, which became the Nazi youth, the figureheads of the Nazi youth, and empower them to steal from people, to assault people, and to even kill people in Germany at will, at their own leisure, if they opposed the Nazi Party. This built up a culture within the government, within the Nazi Party itself, where they were above the law and everybody else had to live in fear of them because they controlled the military, and Article 48 allowed them to use the military and the justice system in whatever way they saw fit, including killing people for arson, who torched public buildings and stuff like that. It quickly, as we know, spiraled out of control, and it allowed Hitler to then start to define what even was a German, right? People became so terrified of the Nazi youth and the brown shirts, right? And the Nazi secret police that they became shelled inside their own selves and refused to talk about what was actually going on. In other words, people turtled up like we saw with COVID-19, where you just kind of complied with everything. Most people did anyways. They didn't talk about their concerns with vaccines. They just complied with the vaccine passport system. They wore one mask when told to wear one. They put two masks on when told to wear two. Hitler, realizing the amount of control that he had, decided that in order for him to get rid of the old Germany that he saw as weak and politically ineffective and politically castrated, if you will, he decided that they needed to set up a Germany that would be proud of a new Germany, a Germany where people focused on whatever Hitler said was Germany, and then they would mirror it. Basically, brainwashing. And with the advent of television, Germany was huge on this. Their technological advancements were some of the best in the world. Hitler was able to continuously brainwash people, especially children who didn't have any other benchmark to think about in terms of German society. He was able to completely redefine what German was, being a German. They destroyed books. They had massive public book burnings that must have just terrified people inside their hearts, but on the outside people just went along with it because the more fervent you could be towards this stuff, the more on board you could be with it, the better you did, and the less likely you were to be robbed by the brown shirts, and the less likely you were to be hurt, and the more likely that they would ask you to come and join them so that you could rob from other people and bully and push them around and do whatever the hell you liked. So there was a lot of advantages for people jumping on board, and there was a lot to fear if you didn't, including being killed. So people thought, that it started with the Jews. It really, truly did. This was a political move, and it was done to destroy the political opposition in Germany. The Jewish people themselves were pretty wealthy overall as a population, as a subpopulation in Germany, but they were still Germans. Everybody up to that point had considered them Germans. Hitler, needing money to start World War II and needing money to be able to buy off industry so that they would build him the weapons and scientists that would build him new types of airplanes and everything else like that, he had to have money for that. So he looked to the Jewish people, who typically were not part of the Nazi Party and were voters that would vote against the Nazi Party, who had money that he could go after. And so he did. He used television, which people were not used to at the time, to brainwash people over and over and over again into believing the Jewish people now, not just the communists, but that the Jewish people themselves were a part of some extra plot to weaken the German people themselves, even though those Jewish people were Germans themselves. This is what happens when people get to redefine what a society is. Hitler turned Germans against Germans, and Hitler, on a dime, could say, oh, you're part of the master race, or you're not based on your skin tone or anything else like that, but based on your compliance. So if you did not comply as a Aryan person, you would be basically lumped in as a Jew lover, a Jew hater, would hate a Jew lover. Matter of fact, there were people in Germany who hated Germans that were not Jewish, that liked Jewish people more than they hated the Jews themselves. People were viciously attacked. Entire families were attacked inside Germany of people that didn't want to go along with the fact that their next door neighbor that they loved and maybe even dated and had family events with as kids and everything else like that, that those people were not German and that those people deserved horrible treatment, right? They didn't want to go along with that. So to the Nazi Party, those people were an even bigger enemy than the Jewish people were being promoted as. And that is why the Nazi youth got so ingrained in schools and indoctrinated, brainwashed, whatever you want to call it, to even go after their own parents. So if the kid came home and they heard their dad or their mom going, "Did you see what happened to our neighbor?" Right? They took all their stuff and they just carted them off. The child turns around and goes and tells the teacher that his parents are Jew sympathizers. And oh boy, watch out, right? Then all of a sudden, here comes over the brown shirts, here comes the SS. Everybody else around the community knows, because nothing sets a perfect example like a throng of thugs and official government officials and police and everything else like that coming and saying, this person is bad. The entire community sees it, and the entire community lives in fear. I'm going to read you one of the poems about this happening, okay? And I can't fully pronounce the name, so I'm just going to read you the poem. It says, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." How truthful is that? That exactly explains just how terrible and the gripping fear that took over German society, where people, even as they were watching so many people they cared about suffer and potentially disappear or die or thrown in jail, the fear prevented people from actually, in the end, even standing up for their own rights, because it became that their rights were actually the bad thing. Anybody who wants rights is the bad person. And didn't we see that with COVID-19? Didn't we see that with the vaccine passports here in Canada? Didn't we see that with the fact that you could not even leave Canada if you did not have an up-to-date vaccine passport with COVID-19 shots that we now know did not work? This is the problem with fascism, folks. You see, with Adolf Hitler, he hated the fact that German people did not immediately adore him. And he went after and made sure that he indoctrinated people over and over and over and over again to fear not liking what he said, to fear ever speaking out. And that's what we had here during COVID-19. You're a COVID-idiot, anti-vaxxer, anti-masker, right? We have people saying we should be locked up if you're not wearing a mask or you're not getting vaccinated. We should have the military going door to door, right? You should be thrown in jail, or even worse, you should be forced to take the injection, period. We are becoming so fascist so quick, and people did not realize that that's how it works, right? So, when Hitler got into World War II, he was doing successful. Very, very successful. He had some of the best military equipment in the world because he was paying off science and industry to do this, and more importantly, providing them with cheap labor that they could do whatever they wanted to. So you didn't have to worry about safety standards. You didn't have to worry if people died in your employment. You didn't have to worry about paying them a fair wage. Now, if you wanted to keep them as employees because they were good employees, you could give them basically just enough money to feed themselves, right? Whereas with the Jews, they weren't paid at all and often not fed at all, which is what you saw in the concentration camps. But with Hitler himself, he still constantly attacked the entire German population through forcing them into endless wars that he could not possibly win. I'm going to explain this to you. At first, he was very successful. But then as things started to spread out and he had to put more and more people in different countries that he had conquered across Europe, he realized that the Communist Party in the USSR was becoming a huge threat, and he couldn't just fight against the UK and take care of that problem and then go and attack America, because Stalin was over there and he was a hardcore communist, and Hitler remembered how he treated communists inside Germany and knew that the communists inside Russia would not tolerate him for very much longer once they had built up their own massive military force that he would probably not be able to stop. So Hitler decided, I have to really pivot over here and send my troops into Russia. His goal was, I will attack so fast and drive myself so far into Russia, his military, into Russia, that they will be able to conquer Moscow, they will be able to take over and basically wipe out communism at the core, wipe out the government, and leave the rest of Russia fractured. That was his goal. They almost succeeded, folks. But the Communist Party itself was so ruthless to its own people that it just forced people basically to go and fight and die. They were giving people guns with no bullets. So half the people didn't have bullets in their guns, right? So you got one guy getting shot who's got no bullet in his gun, and you got another guy behind him who's got the bullet in the gun. So the guy, you've got human shields. And that's what they did just to slow down the Germans enough so that when winter hit, when winter set in, all of those summer troops that had extended themselves over and over and over again would be stuck inside Russia in a brutal winter with inadequate equipment and supply lines that could be cut off at multiple positions with inside Russia. Remember, if you're inside Russia, you've already got stuff for winter. You're already prepared. You've already got stuff in your home. You've already got wood chopped and everything else like that. The Germans did not have that stuff. They were still sitting in summer attire because they didn't want to be sweating their butts off wearing huge parkas and everything else like that. This meant that the German people in the army literally were freezing to death. And all Stalin had to do was basically let that happen. And it did happen en masse. And then when these people were so sick and so weak, he was easily able to start surrounding them, picking off parts of the army one by one after he cut off the supply lines and butchering them. Now, Hitler should have known all of this, and probably did, which is what I tried to say earlier. He feared what was going to be coming out of Russia. But had he really cared about the German people, he would have withdrawn them, because he knew winter was coming. His generals would have been warning him that winter is coming, a very long, cold winter that those troops could not possibly survive. But Hitler, in his own mind, felt, because of the brainwashing from World War I, that the German people could not be beat. He bought into his own propaganda and propaganda from generation earlier and kept that going. And he refused to pull his troops back, causing massive devastation and loss of life to the German people themselves. Right? This is my point. Hitler didn't like the people of Germany. He didn't like most of them. He didn't respect them at all. People keep saying he was a nationalist. He was a monster. A brainwashed monster who brainwashed himself even more than he was brainwashed prior. And the worst part is, while he sat in a lap of luxury with all this stolen stuff from around the world, with a bunch of people standing around him, too terrified to tell him that he was actually going to lose the war, he enjoyed the best of everything, but became more and more paranoid, realizing he was losing that war, even though others were not so direct in telling him. So while he's sitting there like that, living like a king, what was he doing? He was sending the German children off to fight for him. Young boys, like we're talking 14, 15-year-old boys. He knew they would not be equipped properly to be able to fight. He knew he was having problems creating munitions. He never once turned around and offered himself up as a peace token to end the war. Instead, he waited to the bitter, bitter, bitter end until Berlin itself had been basically obliterated, bombed by Allies into the ground, right? We had the Axis on one side, the Allies on the other. And they just flattened. Because of the bombing of Britain, they're like, well, if you can bomb London, we're going to bomb Berlin. And they sure as heck did. Folks, what we are witnessing right now in Canada is a government that has repeatedly over and over and over again through COVID-19, the overdose crisis, the climate change emergency, they keep trying to rule by edict. They basically want their own version of Article 48 that allows the government to supersede legislative authority and discussion and debate, and that they just simply become the law themselves. We watched that with David Eby in British Columbia as well. He wanted to pass Bill 15, which would have given him almost godlike control over our society. Law made flesh, right? Where he gets to decide what law is. Absolutely unthinkable. And the fact that he did that because of Donald Trump's tariffs, this is why he wanted it. He wanted to say, he said, oh, the emergency with Trump's tariffs is so bad that I need supreme chancellorship, basically, over British Columbia. I will be your leader. I will be the one to make the decisions and have everything done how I say, and I decide the winners and losers. I'm not kidding you. This is exactly what he wanted to do. Very much fascist. Got nothing to do with communism at all. He partnered up with Big Pharma to provide safe supply drugs to kids and to indoctrinate kids in schools that they're born wrong. We have watched this fascism roll right across Canada, where the government has more authority than the parent. And in fact, the government doesn't even have to tell the parent if the child is on hard drugs or taxpayer-funded hard drugs. And if the parents want their children cleaned up from those drugs, the government says no. If the government grooms your child to think that your child's born wrong, and you say, that's not true, my child's not born wrong, I love my child, the government says you're abusing the child, and the government can throw you in jail, or the government can take your child away, or both, which has happened in British Columbia. In fact, our government has passed Bill 36 in BC, which allows the BC NDP to throw doctors in jail for up to 2 years and to fine their clinics up to $500,000 and themselves $200,000 personally if they do not toe the government line on gender identity, on safe supply, on the COVID vaccines being mandated and safe, on mask mandates and everything else like that. Our government has taken over the role of doctor. And our government says, we know better than your doctor. And you should not trust your doctor. You should trust us. Our government has been deciding that even though they needed emergency powers that thankfully they didn't get Bill 15, they decided that, oh, we're going to take 4 months off anyways. So first it was an extreme event where we needed emergency powers in our government to all of a sudden we don't even have to show up for 4 months at all to answer to anybody, and we're just going to rule like that, which is exactly what is happening. Federally, as British Columbians are dying in massive numbers and children are dying in record numbers from overdose year after year, our government has turned around and said flat out that that is not a crisis, even though British Columbia has some of the worst overdose rates from fentanyl in the world and even more toxic drugs than fentanyl. But Mark Carney, who's a mainstay at the World Economic Forum for decades, has gratefully told all of us that, hey, that's not a crisis at all. Sure, it might be a crisis in the United States of America, but here in Canada, we have a different crisis to look at, and it's climate change. You see, climate change supersedes everything. And Mark Carney believes that because of climate change, 42 million Canadians are now responsible for the world. And if we all don't give up our freedoms and make all of our taxes go towards fighting climate change, that somehow we are letting the world down and the planet will burn, which is absolutely nonsense. There's only 42 million Canadians, folks, not many. The world has, what, 9 billion people or so? So let's face facts. It's all propaganda. But the government gets to spend as much money as they want, telling us that climate change is real, telling us miracle vaccines will save lives for COVID-19, telling us that mask mandates save lives, telling us that injection sites save lives, telling us that taxpayer-funded hard drugs for little kids is actually good and going to save lives because kids are going to do drugs anyways. This is what you expect in a fascist society. And this is what people need to understand. Just like Hitler teamed up with scientists and teamed up with world-leading experts, whether they were, working in industry for building military equipment, or whether they were working on public health, or whether they were working on experimental, tests on people to see how people ran, to see how people work, to see how your brain worked, to see how your heart worked, to see how your liver worked. All of those companies loved Hitler because Hitler let them do as they liked, which is what we're seeing right now, right? If you don't want your child doing taxpayer-funded hard drugs, the government says, too bad. Too bad. We're saving lives by doing it. And they will teach this stuff to kids in schools over and over and over and over again. And just like in Germany in the 1930s, people are too terrified in Canada to stand up to this fascism because a lot of them are older. They don't want to lose their pensions. They don't want to be fired with cause and lose out on EI benefits and everything else like that. And more importantly, they do not want to be attacked and have their social status destroyed. So these are the people that would rather go around with their pronouns in the bio and claim that men can get pregnant and that there are birthing people out there as opposed to women giving birth. These are people that believe that men belong in girls' safe spaces, that men belong in women's sports. You see, just like Hitler redefined what being German was, our government is redefining everything from what a woman is to what's safe to what is acceptable for our societies. Our government is literally allowing squalor everywhere as long as their drugs can get into the hands of addicts. When those addicts trash communities, destroy property, assault people, the government says, no problem. You're a mental health victim, so hey, we're not going to put you in jail. But if you speak out about this and you defend yourself, like we saw yesterday with the guy being charged after a home invader with a career history who's wanted by police, who had a weapon, the guy broke into an apartment at 3:20 in the morning. The resident of that apartment woke up and found the guy in there. They had a confrontation. He beat the guy up pretty bad, I guess, but defending himself and his home. The government says he committed a crime because he defended himself too well against the armed attacker who is actually being charged with having a weapon for dangerous purposes. So if you can't even protect yourself in your own home, folks, from a violent thug, you're not in a free society, you're a slave. That's the truth of it all. If you can't decide what goes into your body, you're a slave. If you can't decide what treatments your children get for drugs, you're a slave. So are they. If you can't go visit your parents in an old folks' home because the government says even though they're fully vaccinated, fully masked, and you're fully vaccinated and masked, you couldn't go in there and see your grandparents or your parents because you had to save lives by staying away, and you complied to all of that, you're not in a free society. This is what fascism does. It's not communism at all. It's a cooperation between government and elite think tanks, elite companies like Pfizer, big pharma, big military complex, social media platforms to brainwash people. That's fascism. That's true fascism. And what we're seeing in China is kind of like a hybrid of fascism and communism because China realized the pure communist model would never truly work for them, which is why they reached out to Apple, which is why they reached out to Google, which is why Mark Zuckerberg was trying to kiss their butt so much, because he wanted in there for the money, power, influence, and the ability to be able to manipulate people and study how that affects them so that he could brainwash people better too. This is where we're at, folks. It's going to get to the point where not only will you not be able to decide what goes into your body, but what comes out of your body. Because that's what's the inevitable outcome, right? If the government decides that, hey, you're not very useful to us, and the guy over here could use your heart, and he's a party loyalist, or we like him, the government eventually goes, you know what, he deserves your heart, you don't. Why are you being so selfish? Right? That's where we're headed. And you can see that stuff happening in China all the time. With AI would have been Hitler's wet dream. The ability to spy on everybody, en masse, be able to tailor propaganda that's specifically designed to their own psychological tendencies to convince them that the lie is the truth. This is where we're at, folks. So when you take a look back in history, remember, Hitler was not in love with the German people. Hitler hated much of the German people and forced them to comply through brute thuggery and using legislative authority that was already being used before he even got into power. And that's why I keep telling everybody, this is such a slippery slope that we're already on, because we can't even quantify how laws that are being passed now, like signing onto the World Health Organization pandemic treaty that is legally binding in Canada, will impact us. Because we will end up being in a situation where the government will say to us, oh, I'm not actually doing this to you. We have to do this because the World Health Organization, the leading experts on this authority on viruses or public health, tells us to. In other words, we're no longer in a nation. We are, as Justin Trudeau said, a post-national state. And it was Justin Trudeau in 2017 on Canada's 150th birthday that showed us he is trying to redefine what Canada is as well, and was way back then. He sat and openly said that being born in Canada makes you less Canadian than people who come to Canada because they choose Canada, as opposed to us who default in, as he called it. Can you imagine how insulting that is to First Nations? And to people like me, born in Canada. I'm first generation on my dad's side. My dad came over after World War II to North America, to Canada. So, folks, we all need to wake up and realize that until we stop complying, until we start putting our own political pressure on these World Economic Forum puppets in our country, we will lose. And it won't be long until we look like Hong Kong or worse, because that's the end game. We already saw it with the COVID-19 vax passports. I'm warning right now, if next spring we start to see this mosquito virus from China spread like wildfire right across Canada, the government would use that for AI drone surveillance of Canadian communities, of your own backyard, of your own patio, looking for standing water. And if you have any standing water on your patio, that they could send you automatically a fine and potentially even tap into your bank account directly. We already saw with the Freedom Convoy how they literally locked people out of their own bank accounts simply for donating as little as $40 or $50 for a peaceful political movement. Doesn't that sound fascist to you? It sure as hell sounds fascist to me, folks. Just remember, we don't want to be in that situation again. The only people who do are the people who are going to benefit from it. And that's the insiders. Folks, I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please like and share it. You can either follow me on Facebook or you can follow me here on X. Take care, everybody. Have a great one.